Okay, this video will be about how to add other sequences to your drum loops and how to add some basic effects in Ableton. So in the last video, we talked about how to do some basic drum sequencing. I lowered my tempo to 80 and I used the Impulse 808 TR-808 drum emulator. And so now I'd like to add another layer to this, a bass line. And I recommend keeping bass lines really simple. Think of major and minor triads if you're aware of those on your MIDI controller. If not, just basically a drone, a step above or below in a rhythmic way is interesting enough for a bass line, and I think that's a good place to start. So remember that our drum loop was 1 measure long, and we looped it out. And so we used our loop function here to not only click assign, but also to overdub as we played in. And remember, we set our record quantization to 16th notes. And I recommend doing that as well. Again, that's in the edit menu, record quantization, 16th note quantization. So let's go over here, and I'm going to loop out a second measure of my drum sequence. And then I'm going to make my playback loop also 2 measures. Notice that my playback loop, remember, is activated by this loop in the transport controls. And if I wanted to overdub any sort of sounds, I would use this plus button so that it will basically loop over itself and allow me to record other layers. So we were using this one last time, but I want to add a bass element. So I'm going to go to Instruments, Instrument Rack, and go to Bass, and basic 303 bass is good enough for now. I'm going to load that into my second MIDI track and hit the Record Enable button so I can hear what it sounds like. Okay, so that's the leftmost C on my MIDI controller. I want it to be lower, so I'm going to hit the octave down button on my MIDI controller. And I'll keep trying. That's a little too low, so I'm going to go back up again. I'm going to come up with something simple in C minor. So I've got C, G, E, flat. So now that I've got the overdub enabled, I've got loop enabled, I've set my 2 measures of loop to happen here. And because I've record enabled on this second track, it's going to print MIDI sequencing into that track. Record enabling tells the sequencer where you're sending the MIDI input, right? Because your MIDI controller can control any of these instruments, we want it to only go into this second one. In fact, I'm even going to delete these other audio tracks because I'm not going to need them at all. So if I go over here to my basic 303, which is my bass instrument, and I record enable it, right? Now I've got sound there. So I'm going to hit record, and it's going to count me off. And I can even turn on my click track if I want to. Okay, for some reason it started in the middle. That's not what I wanted to do. So we're going to go back to the beginning. Let me start that over again and sort of explain what happened. When the reason why it started recording in the middle of the sequence, in the middle of the timeline, was because I had my playback cursor set in somewhere else. I had been clicking around on the screen and I didn't realize that this little blue line was right there. So if I want my playback cursor to go back to the very beginning, I'll hit stop twice. Double stop on the transport will send that back to the beginning every time. So I have a habit of just hitting double stop most of the time anyway. So let me just redo that recording and explain why. So I'm going to hit double stop and then record, and it'll count me off. Okay, I'm going to keep it simple. So I basically just got a C minor triad. Turn off my click at this point. now I've created a simple bass line to go with my simple backbeat, right? So if I go here, remember that if I want to loop this out in my arrangement, if I want to loop this out for a minute, say, I'm going to zoom out so that I can see my durational time down here. And my drum loop, remember, I can loop out as long as I want. So I'm going to go out to about a minute here. And that's roughly 20 bars. Okay, so if I go down to my bass line that I've just composed and it's been quantized for me, I can loop it out, but it won't loop unless I have this button pressed. Right? If it's not pressed and I go to loop it out, it's just empty space. But instead I want it to loop, so I'm going to press the loop button and I'm going to drag it out and it will loop for me. Okay. So that's a basic way to create sequences. Your ability to play or to play chords or play keyboard is helpful, but you don't need to. You can simply press a key to use it as a drone. You can press a key to go a half step or a whole step up, right? If you're not aware of the C minor triad here, you can just simply go up a half step, which sounds okay too. You can use other bass instruments, but you can explore other kinds of sounds. Like for instance, if I wanted to try a different one, now that I've got this sequenced, I can just drag another bass sound into my track, and it'll use this sequence with those sounds. Right? Or let's say I wanted to try this one. It has a different duration sound or other sounds. Right. So there's lots of different variations that you can choose to excite your mix or or whatever tune you're working on here. Let's try Fat Square. Okay. So there are lots of ways to work with this once you've got it sequenced. And Ableton makes it really easy for you to just drag and drop new sounds from your instruments folder into this sequence. Adding effects is also rather straightforward. Global effects are easiest. If we tab back over to the other view, right, the session view, these effects sends go directly to preloaded reverb and delay lines. So A is your reverb, delay is B. So this A knob will send this sound to the A effects chain. The B knob will send this sound to the B effects chain. And you can, of course, add more effects later, but basically, let's say I wanted to add reverb to my bass line. I want to say I want reverb on the bass line, so that is this track here. It says Fat Square Bass. I'm going to go ahead and turn up the A knob. Let me actually go back over here and hit play. And you can see the signal being sent to that reverb. Right? If I double click on this reverb, I can now change some of the parameters. And kind of tweak it as I like. Let's say I want my drum beat to go into my reverb or my delay line, right? So and then I'm going to send it to B. So if I wanted to have delay, so the delay too will have a series of dry or wet. And you can sculpt it however you like. And so very quickly we have effects printed onto our sounds here. So that's how you add another sequence layer and how you can add simple effects to your sounds. If you wanted to add effects to just this instrument, you can easily do that too. Our audio effects category here gives us lots of options. So if we go up here to delay, let's say I wanted a filter delay, and I just pick one of these that sounds cool to me. So I'm going to go with Lupo, and I'm going to put this at the end. I could drag this down here into this tray, and it'll add that effect to this instrument only. So if I hit S, just getting the sound of this one effect. And maybe let's try a different one. So you can see how you can quickly add other exciting sort of things to your simple Ableton sequences. In the next video, I'll address sampling.